Hello and welcome to another AIC video. In each of my videos I try to answer a question for my viewers, and I really wanted to address why somebody might buy a P1 or the new T1 over a Legion 7. This is a question I've actually asked myself quite a few times before buying my P1, and I'm so glad to have a Legion here that was the same generation-ish as my P1 as a comparison. So this is a 9th gen Legion 7i, Legion Pro 7i, and it has a 14th gen Intel processor and a 4080 GPU. And I think it's a pretty valid comparison with my P1 Gen 7. So it has a Core Ultra CPU and a 4070 GPU. So, like I said, I feel like it's a pretty valid comparison, as they cost a fairly similar amount of money depending on your configuration. They tend to have higher end CPUs and GPUs, higher end screens with higher refresh rates, the option for multiple storage drives, more than your average port selections, higher refresh rate screens, like I said, and they seem to really overlap in their target audience. At least for me, it sure did. And I really struggled going back and forth between buying myself the P1 or buying another Legion. I had one previously and I really enjoyed. And, you know, for me, buying it for personal use means a lot of content creation, gaming, and just general entertainment, watching videos and things like that. And so it was kind of a struggle to figure out which one to spend my money on. Obviously, I ended up with my P1. I've covered it in several previous videos. And why did I pick my P1 over a Legion? With any laptop, there are a lot of compromises. It's kind of the 3-point rule. You can have two, but not the third. With laptops, it's more of a spectrum between the three. You give up a bit in one area, it gives you more in another. Compromises with the Legion mainly is portability. It is loud, the battery life is not great, and it is not cool. It gets quite warm when you're using it. Even sitting here, I should probably put this in the quiet mode. Even just sitting here with normal use, the fans kick on and off way more frequently than they do on my P1, and they're quite a bit louder. And when running benchmarks, I ran benchmarks, as you can see on both of these. We hit over 60 decibels with the phone just sitting here on the trackpad on the Legion, whereas on my P1, maxed out about 44. And that's a huge difference in noise. And also, the quality of noise is far less pleasant on the Legion than it is on the P1. Though one thing to note, the P1 did recover more quickly to a quiet state than the P1 did. It took just a few seconds once the benchmarks were done for the P1 to quiet down, or excuse me, for the Legion to quiet down. The P1 did take a couple of minutes for the fans to finally quit being loud. But as you can see with the benchmark scores, can this thing perform? We get 20,000, more, almost 20,000 points higher, about a, what was that, 70% improvement in performance over the P1 for the CPU. The 3D Mark is 12,000 points higher, so a more than 50% improvement in performance. That's a lot of performance for kind of similar money for the most part. Obviously, prices vary and there's different deals and sales and stuff, but on average, they're pretty close in price, and so you get a lot more performance out of the Legion than you do out of the P1 as far as benchmarks go. The P1 does give up a few things, obviously performance and some of that cooling capacity. You also give up some of the connectivity. This does not have the 2.5 gig NIC that this one has, but you get portability and lightness. I also find that the P1 is far more ergonomic because it is thinner. You can see that here along the, now I have this raised to the back, but along this front edge, there's a good difference between the front edge of this and this, as how far they are off the desktop. And so when typing things, I find this to be much more comfortable in the long term. The centered keyboard is also a big thing for me when typing for long periods of time. I don't need a numpad for my day-to-day life, so I'm happy to sacrifice it for a more ergonomic experience for me. They kind of split the difference when it comes to serviceability and upgradability. Having huge fans that suck in dust like crazy means you should take the time to service the laptop more frequently. The P1 does have a special RAM that's harder to find on the market and a soldered Wi-Fi adapter, but being that it is a Wi-Fi 7, it's not that big of a deal. I don't see any reason to upgrade for a while. The Legion back cover is a bigger pain to take off, and you're more likely to break the clips around the heat sinks, meaning it won't be quite as secure in the future, though the RAM is a more standard SODIMM and more easily upgradable, plus it has upgradable Wi-Fi, things like that. The big benefit of the Legion is turning a lot of electricity into flashing lights at a much faster rate. The Legion has a 175 watt GPU. The P1's GPU is only 65 watts. That's 115 extra watts that the Legion can use to get that GPU to crank out more FPS. If everything else was equal, that alone would account for a much higher frame rate. But the Legion also gets 4 more gigs of video RAM along with the higher tier 4080 versus the 4070, and you could even get it with a 4090 in this generation with 16 gigs of RAM versus the 8 in the P1. And sometimes you can find this for cheaper than you can find the P1. So it's a much faster machine that if you're doing things like gaming, there's no comparison. If that's your main focus, the performance you get out of this is a no-brainer. So saying that, what would cause somebody to pick the P1 over the Legion? Going back to the overall design of the Legion, the Legion is big, it's heavy, it's hot, it's loud. If I was sitting in a meeting room with my boss and my boss's boss and their boss, which I actually do pretty frequently, and my laptop started screaming its fans at them like this often does, and I'd find that a bit embarrassing. I often have to talk over the fans of the Legion when doing normal tasks, much less when I'm gaming on it. They get that loud. Synthetic benchmarks are a good way to compare two different systems against each other, but they don't tell the whole story. Doing a handbrake encode of a 4K video file that is nearly 24 gigabytes in size to a 1080 in handbrake, the P1 only took about 10 minutes or so longer to encode. Is it longer? Yes. Is it hours longer? No. That 70% improvement in benchmarks only meant about a 40% improvement in time in a real world task. And that's a task I do with some regularity. Because I work from home, but I also have to go into the office and things like that, I need to be mobile with my laptop. And when I put my laptop on battery saver mode, but with full screen brightness because I'm old and blind, I can get north of 5 hours on my P1. Sometimes I can get, if I'm willing to drop the screen brightness, I can get over 6 hours of battery life on my P1. The Legion, on the other hand, I got about 2.5 hours of battery life. Of course, with more powerful hardware, you're going to burn through a battery faster. But the P1 is no slouch and can be used nearly through a full workday on battery versus the Legion that can't go very far from its charger. The P1 weighs about 4 pounds. The charger alone for the Legion weighs over 2 pounds, and the laptop weighs almost 6. The charger for the P1 weighs about a pound. Not only does it last longer in battery, it is also just easier to be portable with it. It's lighter. The things you have to carry with it are lighter. And like I said, I rarely sit in one place all day long, so it's important for me to be able to be away from the wall outlet for an amount of time. One thing that I thought was interesting on the P1 is that the speakers are much better than they are on the Legion. They have more bass, they have more top end, they have a wider sound stage. It sounds more full, if that makes sense. Just a richer experience. And it's kind of shocking, being that this is a gaming focused laptop. I would think that they would put more effort into the sound quality. ThinkPads traditionally have had pretty terrible speakers on them, but the P1 definitely outshines here in this category. I know this will be the audio being picked up from my phone. Hopefully you can hear the difference between the two systems. They're both muted. Go ahead and play. So that's the Legion right now. And that's the P1. Now I have them both set at 50% with YouTube at max volume. So they're on the same volume settings. I work in a pretty professional environment when I have to go into the office. Having a bright, flashy laptop, you can see all the RGB on here, is not a great look in those situations. A black ThinkPad just fits the room better. I know it shouldn't matter, but it does. And going back to the fan noise, I can't imagine having to have a conference call with this laptop screaming away. Applications like Teams consume a ton of resources and actually cause the system to run a bit harder than you would expect. I spend 8+ hours a day in front of a computer. I've always in the past preferred a 14-inch laptop due to the centered keyboard and trackpad. The P1 is unique in the fact that it has the larger 16-inch screen, but a centered keyboard. As I get older, the larger screen, a much brighter screen, is very appreciated on my old tired eyes. But then being able to have the center keyboard that I know I harp on this a lot in my videos, but if you don't have the experience of the centered keyboard, if you're used to this and you spend some time with this, it's hard to go back to this, in my opinion. So I personally needed a mobile workstation. And the P1 is just that, a workstation laptop that is very mobile. The Legion is a desktop replacement. It can be mobile, but it doesn't want to or like to be. Yes, the P1 can be more expensive, is less powerful. It can thermal throttle more depending on the workload you're doing, and on paper is the worst of the two options. But once I unplug it from the wall and have to carry it from desk to desk, meeting room to meeting room, and even into the data center, it becomes very clear that I made the right choice for me. I'll be doing a follow-up on this video with a direct comparison of some head-to-head benchmarks. Please be on the lookout for that video.